You know, when you walk into a room and flip a light switch, there's this immediate, deeply ingrained expectation that the lights will just come on.
Right. Yeah, you just expect it.
Exactly. You don't pause to think about the miles of high voltage wiring or the regional power grid or, transformers sitting down the street.
It's an entirely invisible system to most of us.
It really is. But right now, on the news, you are literally watching the main breaker switch for the entire global economy get flipped to the off position.
And that is a terrifying thing to watch in real time.
It is. So welcome to Headlines Wednesday. This is a special edition of Background Brief.
And today's deep dive is focusing on the crisis that is just absolutely dominating the news cycle right now in March 2026, the choking off of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, we are pulling from a massive stack of sources today to really unpack the sheer scale of this bottleneck.
Right. We've got geopolitical analyses, real-time maritime shipping data.
Historical naval records, too.
Yeah, and the absolute latest news transcripts coming out of the Persian Gulf.
And the reason we are doing this deep dive is specifically for you. You're seeing the endless headlines, right?
The stranded ships, the skyrocketing oil prices.
Exactly. And, the escalating war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. But it is so incredibly easy to tune all of that out.
Oh, for sure. It just feels like another distant conflict in a complicated part of the world.
Right. Like, why should you care if you are, say, an IT technician sitting in Germany?
Or a farmer in Japan.
Or a factory worker in North America? Why does this matter to you?
Well, if we connect the events in the Gulf to the bigger picture, I mean, this isn't just a regional military squabble.
No, not at all.
The Strait of Hormuz is literally the molecular foundation of your daily life.
So our mission today is to take a step back from that frantic 24/7 news cycle.
Yeah, slow it down a bit.
Right. We're going to explain exactly what this geographical choke point is, what is actually sitting on those hundreds of stranded ships, and the underlying mechanics.
The mechanics of why this narrow strip of water acts as a global price switch for, well, pretty much everything you buy.
Exactly. But before we jump into the maps and the cargo manifests, I need to offer a really important warning right off the bat.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Our sources today discuss a highly volatile, politically charged, and very active conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
And we take absolutely no sides here.
None. Our mission is purely to impartially report on the facts from our sources and convey the reality of the geopolitical situation on the ground.
And at sea, we are looking exclusively at the mechanics of the crisis, the physics of the shipping industry, and the economic fallout.
Right. We are not litigating the politics of the actors involved.
Exactly.
So let's start with the geography, because when I was reading through the background sources, I was just struck by the physical reality of this place.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. The Strait of Hormuz is the only sea passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and eventually out to the Arabian Sea.
And the open ocean beyond that, yeah.
Right. You have Iran bordering it to the north, and the Muzandam Peninsula, which is shared by Oman and the United Arab Emirates, down to the south.
And interestingly, I saw in the sources that linguists actually debate where the name Hormuz even comes from.
Oh, right. I saw that too. The linguistic history points to two very different Persian origins, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the most prominent theory is that it stems from Ahura Mazda.
Which is the ancient Zoroastrian god of light, order, and wisdom, right?
Exactly. But then local historians point to an alternative, much more grounded Persian word.
Gurmu.
Yeah, Hermu, which simply translates to date palm.
I love that. Going from the god of light all the way down to a local date palm is quite the range.
It really is.
But let's talk about the physical dimensions, because this is where the sources really trip me up.
The width.
Yeah. At its narrowest point, the strait is roughly 39 kilometers wide. That's about 21 nautical miles.
Right.
Now, 39 kilometers sounds massive. If you think about a 39-kilometer wide stretch of land, that's an incredibly wide mega highway.
It's wider than the English Channel at its narrowest point.
Exactly. So why do maritime analysts constantly refer to this place as dangerously narrow?
Well, the discrepancy really comes down to the difference between geographic width and navigable width.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
Meaning from coastline to coastline, sure, it's a marathon distance, but you aren't skipping a stone across it.
Right, you're driving massive ships through it.
Exactly. You are navigating Very large crude carriers, or VLCCs.
These modern supertankers.
Yeah, and these things are industrial leviathans. A fully loaded VLCC can have a draft of up to 25 meters.
A draft meaning the depth of the ship's hull sitting underwater.
Precisely, up to 25 meters underwater.
That's essentially an 8-story building totally submerged beneath the waves.
It's wild to think about. And outside of a few designated deep-water channels, the Strait of Hormuz is incredibly treacherous.
Really? Like shallow water?
Yeah, you have unpredictable shallows, you've got incredibly strong tidal currents, and shifting underwater topography.
So if a ship with a 25-meter draft wanders out of the deep channel,
It will run aground, it'll tear open its hull and cause an apocalyptic environmental disaster.
oh wow.
Furthermore, a supertanker moving at speed takes miles to come to a complete stop. You literally cannot just hit the brakes.
So you have to keep these massive ships from colliding with each other, or the seafloor.
Right. And to do that, international maritime law enforces a traffic separation scheme, or TSS.
I was looking at a map of the TSS and the sources, and it essentially turns the ocean into a highly regulated turnpike.
That's a great way to put it. It forces all commercial traffic into two very strict lanes.
One coming, one going.
Exactly. There is one lane for inbound traffic entering the Gulf and one for outbound traffic leaving it.
And how wide are those lanes?
Each lane is only 2 nautical miles wide.
Just 2 miles. Wow.
Yeah, and separating them is a 2 nautical mile buffer zone to prevent head-on collisions.
So out of that entire 39-kilometer width, the actual highway for these global titans is a tightly controlled 6 nautical mile corridor.
That's it, just 6 miles.
Wait, so if you're funneling roughly 20 million barrels of volatile liquid energy every single day through a corridor that is only 6 miles wide,
The ships themselves become the ultimate vulnerability.
they are trapped in a bottleneck.
Completely trapped.
Which begs the question, what exactly is sitting in that 6-mile traffic jam right now? Because the media is hyperfixated on crude oil.
I mean, the energy numbers are impossible to ignore.
For sure.
Before this March 2026 blockade, roughly 20% of the world's daily oil consumption passed through that specific 6-mile corridor.
And it's not just oil, right?
Right. Alongside that is about 20% of the global liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
And that's mostly hitting from Qatar to Asian markets.
Exactly.
Okay, so the oil's the headline. But the real story, the one that explains why that IT tech in Germany or the farmer in Japan is personally affected, is about what else is on those boats.
The hidden cargo.
Yes, let's look at the hidden cargo, starting with helium. The sources note that Qatar produces roughly 30% of the world's total helium capacity.
And almost all of that Qatari helium has to ship out through the Strait of Hormuz.
And it ships in specialized, heavily pressurized containers, right?
Yeah, these containers act like massive floating thermos flasks. They're designed to keep the helium gas chilled to minus 269 degrees Celsius.
Okay, let me just pause on that number for a second. Minus 269 degrees Celsius is basically absolute zero.
It is incredibly cold.
Why on earth are we expending that much energy to freeze a gas we use for, like, party balloons?
Well, this is where the public perception of helium is completely disconnected from its industrial reality.
Okay, unpack that.
Helium is a non-renewable absolute necessity for the modern tech and medical industries.
So if you are that IT worker in Germany,
Your entire industry relies on semiconductors, and you cannot manufacture high-end microchips without helium gas.
why? What does it do?
It's used to control the atmosphere and cool the silicon during fabrication.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. And what about the medical side?
It's essential for cooling the superconducting magnets inside MRI machines at your local hospital.
So without liquid helium,
Those magnets lose their superconductivity, they heat up, and the MRI machine just ceases to function.
and there's no backup, no alternative gas.
No, there is no synthetic substitute for helium in these applications.
That's wild. So when the strait shuts down and those highly specialized containers are stranded at sea,
The global tech supply chain and medical diagnostics networks are directly hit, literally within weeks.
the tech sector relies on a freezing gas from the Gulf. I honestly never made that connection.
Most people don't.
But what about the farmer in Japan? How does a bottleneck in the Middle East ruin a harvest in East Asia?
For that, we have to look at the chemistry of modern agriculture.
Okay.
The Gulf states sit on massive reserves of incredibly cheap natural gas.
Right, we know that.
And natural gas is the primary raw ingredient needed to synthesize ammonia and urea.
Through that industrial procedure, the Haber-Bosch process.
Exactly, the Haber-Bosch process. Because the energy to run those factories is so cheap there, the Gulf is a fertilizer superpower.
So how much are they actually exporting?
Nearly a third of all global seaborne fertilizer. So urea, ammonia, sulfur, phosphate, it all comes straight out of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz.
A third of the world's seaborne fertilizer. That is a staggering dependency.
It really is, and it heads straight to agricultural hubs in India, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and parts of Africa.
And the sources pointed out something crazy about this.
About the population.
Yeah. Analysts point out that without synthetic fertilizers, the global population would quite literally be halved.
Yeah, the Earth's soil simply couldn't produce enough calories to feed 8 billion people naturally.
So when that farmer in Japan can't get fertilizer.
Or, if the price quadruples, crop yields plummet, and global food prices skyrocket almost immediately.
So an energy crisis at Hormuz cascades into a shipping crisis,
Which triggers a high-tech manufacturing crisis.
which ultimately detonates a global food crisis.
Exactly. And we are only talking about the exports so far.
Oh, right. Trade goes both ways.
The import side of the equation is arguably even more desperate.
Because of the countries locked inside the Gulf.
Yeah. For countries geographically locked inside the Persian Gulf places like Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar, the Strait is their only practical maritime door to the outside world.
What percentage of their goods are we talking about here?
We are talking about nations that rely on imports for 70 to 80% of their food, their medicine, their building materials, their heavy machinery.
Wow. So if nothing goes out, nothing comes in.
It is a total siege on their basic societal functions. Their entire modern existence is predicated on uninterrupted access to that 6-mile corridor.
Seeing how vital this choke point is to literally keeping the modern world fed, powered, and functioning, it isn't surprising that it has been weaponized in the past.
No, not at all. It's an obvious target.
Right. And to truly understand the headlines we're seeing today in March 2026, I noticed the background briefings heavily referencing the 1980s.
Specifically, the tanker war.
Right. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So during the Iran-Iraq War, from 1980 to 1988, both nations sought to bleed the other's economy dry.
By attacking ships.
Yeah, by systematically attacking commercial shipping in the Gulf. And the human cost was terrible. Over 400 civilian sailors from neutral nations were killed.
Which made the global energy market absolutely panic.
Exactly. Which led the United States to step in with Operation Earnest Will in 1987.
The sources call that the largest U.S. naval convoy operation since World War II.
It was massive. Kuwait actually asked both the U.S. and the Soviet Union for help protecting their oil.
And the Reagan administration agreed to this fascinating geopolitical loophole.
Right? The reflagging, yes. They reflagged Kurdi oil tankers with American flags.
Meaning what, technically?
Technically, this meant any attack on those commercial ships would be considered an act of war against the United States.
That is a bold move.
Very bold. They then sent heavily armed U.S. Navy destroyers and cruisers to physically escort these tankers through the strait.
So it was just this massive projection of state power to force a commercial corridor to remain open.
That's exactly what it was.
Well, let me play devil's advocate based on that history.
Okay, go for it.
If the U.S. and its allies kept the oil flowing back in the 1980s by simply sending in a fleet of warships to play bodyguard, why is everyone panicking today?
A fair question.
Right. Why can't the international community just set up a massive convoy system right now, park the Navy in the Gulf, and force the strait open for these stranded ships?
Well, it is a very tempting historical parallel, but it assumes the 1980s convoy was some kind of flawless magic shield.
Which it wasn't.
Not at all. The reality of Operation Earnest Will was messy and, frankly, deadly.
What happened?
On the very first day of the very first escorted convoy, a massive supertanker called the Bridgerton, which was sailing right behind an American warship, struck an Iranian sea mine.
Wait, day one of the operation?
Day one. It was deeply embarrassing and highlighted a glaring tactical flaw.
Which is?
A billion-dollar warship with advanced radar couldn't protect a tanker from a cheap, rudimentary mine floating beneath the waves.
Wow. And the collateral damage of that era was pretty devastating too, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Navigating that narrow corridor under the constant threat of attack created a profound fog of war.
I think the sources mentioned the USS Stark.
Yes. An Iraqi jet mistakenly fired missiles at the USS Stark, killing 37 American sailors.
Oh, man.
And a year later, the USS Vincennes misidentified a civilian airliner, Iran Air Flight 655, as an attacking fighter jet and shot it down.
And everyone on board was killed, right?
Yes, all 290 people on board.
So the lesson from the 80s isn't that military convoys easily solve the problem.
Definitely not.
The lesson is that military intervention in a 6-mile-wide space requires massive state resources, invites deadly miscalculations, and is fundamentally incapable of guaranteeing absolute safety.
Right. It certainly isn't a quick fix for the free market.
Which brings us directly to the modern complexities of the March 2026 blockade.
Because things have changed a lot since 1987.
Yeah, the United Nations Maritime Organization is warning us today that military escorts will absolutely not work the way they did back then.
The technology of war has evolved much faster than the technology of commercial shipping.
So let's look at the current stats from the sources. Since the conflict escalated in late February of 2026, Iran has effectively declared the strait closed.
And the numbers reflect that. Over 1,000 commercial ships are currently stranded.
Just anchored in the Gulf waiting for a safe window.
Yeah. We've seen between 18 and 21 attacks on vessels, and overall, maritime traffic has dropped by roughly 97%.
97%. That is a standstill. So why exactly is a modern convoy futile against this?
It comes down to asymmetric warfare.
Meaning what?
Well, in 1987, the U.S. Navy was looking out for traditional fighter jets, gunboats, and relatively simple stationary mines.
Right.
Today, Iran's arsenal is vastly more sophisticated. They utilize advanced swarm drone technology.
Swarm drones.
Those-
That sounds like sci-fi.
It's very real. We are talking about dozens of autonomous, low-flying explosive drones designed specifically to overwhelm a modern warship's Aegis combat system.
So the warship just can't shoot them all down fast enough.
Exactly. A destroyer can shoot down 10 drones, but the 11th one hits the tanker it's escorting.
And it's not just drones, right?
No. Add to that precision-guided anti-ship cruise missiles fired from mobile launchers hidden in the mountains along the coastline.
Which are incredibly hard to target.
Very hard. And a stockpile of sea mines estimated to be 10 times larger than what they deployed in the 80s.
The sources also highlight the electronic warfare aspect, which I find completely terrifying.
GPS spoofing.
Yes. How does a military unit on the shore trick a multi-million-dollar cargo ship's navigation system?
It's actually shockingly simple in theory. Modern ships rely heavily on digital navigation.
Right, they aren't using sextants anymore.
The crew on the bridge isn't constantly looking out the window with binoculars, they are watching screens. And GPS works by receiving very faint signals from satellites in space.
Okay, so the signal is weak by the time it reaches Earth.
Exactly. So Iranian forces use powerful, localized transmitters to broadcast a stronger, fake GPS signal.
And the ship just listens to the louder signal.
Yes. The ship's antennas latch onto the stronger fake signal. The screens on the bridge show the crew that they are safely navigating inside the international TSS transit corridor.
But they actually aren't.
Right. In reality, their course has been slowly altered, and they are driving the ship directly into hostile territorial waters where they can be legally seized.
Wow. So you're trying to defend against a threat you can't even see? In the digital realm.
It's a completely different battlefield.
And to make matters more complicated, the briefing notes that Iran isn't just dropping a wall of mines across the entire strait and walking away.
No, they are practicing selective control.
Right. They are actively routing ships that they explicitly approve through very narrow channels deep within their own territory.
Specifically between the Iranian islands of Qeshm and Larak.
Why go through the administrative hassle of vetting and routing certain ships?
It is a brilliant piece of psychological and geopolitical warfare.
How so?
By allowing select ships through perhaps those belonging to nations that are politically friendly or ships willing to pay exorbitant fees, Iran demonstrates absolute sovereign control over the global economy.
They're showing who holds the keys.
Exactly. They prove that the strait isn't physically impassable. It is only impassable to those who defy them.
Which essentially renders international maritime law completely irrelevant.
Completely.
It's like the difference between guarding a bank in the 1980s versus guarding one today.
I like that analogy.
Right. In the 80s, you put an armed guard with a shotgun out front to stop a robber walking through the physical door.
Yeah.
But today, that armed guard, the Navy warship, is standing there, but they are dealing with invisible cyber hackers, draining the accounts, drone strikes from the sky, and an entirely digitized threat landscape.
Well, to take your bank analogy one step further, what happens if the bank manager simply refuses to open the doors at all?
Oh, interesting. Why wouldn't they open the doors?
Because the ultimate barrier in 2026 isn't just the missiles or the drones, it is the insurance market.
Ah, the actuaries.
Yes.
The people sitting in offices in London actually deciding the fate of global shipping.
Exactly. If we look at a very recent historical parallel, The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal back in 2023 and 2024, we see exactly how the mechanics of a financial blockade play out.
Right, because the Houthis didn't physically block the Suez Canal with concrete or sunken ships.
They didn't even have a functioning navy.
They just launched enough cheap drones and missiles to make transiting the Red Sea incredibly dangerous.
Right. And the moment it became mathematically too dangerous, the London insurance markets reacted.
How does that insurance work for these massive ships?
So marine insurance is layered, and the specific policy we are talking about here is war risk insurance.
Okay.
The Joint War Committee in London designates certain areas as high risk. When a ship enters those waters, their standard insurance drops away, and they have to pay a massive war risk premium.
And during the Red Sea crisis?
Those premiums exploded from fractions of a percent to over 1% of the total value of the ship per voyage.
Let me do the math on that. Meaning a ship carrying $100 million of cargo suddenly has to pay $1 million just in insurance for a single trip.
Exactly. And in the shipping industry, it is a hard, unbreakable rule. If you cannot secure insurance, you do not sail.
Period.
Period. The cargo owners won't load their goods, and the banks financing the ship will immediately call in their loans if the vessel enters an uninsured risk zone.
So even if you have a U.S. Marine standing on the deck of your ship, the financial risk is just too high.
The market effectively blockades itself. Iran doesn't have to sink every single ship passing through the strait.
They just have to prove they have a capability to sink one or two.
Exactly. The insurance companies run the actuarial models, spike the premiums, and do the rest of the blockade work for them.
Wow. So the Houthis caused commercial traffic through the Suez to drop by nearly 50% year over year, entirely through the threat of sustained violence.
Right. Now apply that exact same dynamic to the Strait of Hormuz.
Where the physical space is even tighter.
And the global stakes are infinitely higher.
Not to mention, the military capabilities of the actor are vastly superior.
Well, exactly. And that is how you end up with the total commercial paralysis we are seeing right now.
Let's pull all of this together.
Yeah.
The Strait of Hormuz is essentially a 39-kilometer-wide geographic quirk. But because of the massive draft of the ships we use in the shallow waters, it bottlenecks down to a 6-mile-wide highway.
Right.
And whoever controls that highway holds the entire modern world hostage.
It is the ultimate pressure point in the globalized economy.
We tend to look at these crisis headlines and think it's just about the price of gas at our local pump. But as we've seen today, it is so much deeper.
Much deeper.
This little strip of water is carrying the molecular foundation of our food supply through fertilizer. It is the absolute backbone of our high-tech medical and computing industries through liquid helium.
Yes.
And it is the sole lifeline for millions of people living inside the Gulf who rely on that water for their daily bread, medicine, and survival.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating reality to ponder as we watch this play out.
What's that?
Well, we are currently watching the world desperately try to transition to greener, localized energy grids. Right?
Yeah, moving away from fossil fuels.
And we're seeing a massive government-funded push to nearshore manufacturing, trying to bring semiconductor supply chains closer to home.
Everyone is actively trying to untangle themselves from these fragile global dependencies.
Exactly. So the final thought I'd leave you with is this. As the world fundamentally re-engineers how it gets power and makes goods over the next few decades, will ancient maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz eventually lose their grip on global security? Or, in our rush to build a new, electrified world, will we simply find ourselves reliant on entirely new, equally vulnerable geographic choke points for the exotic materials of the future?
That is definitely something to chew on the next time you flip that light switch and expect the power to just magically be there. Thanks for tuning in to Background Brief, the place you put the news headlines into a broader context.